everybody, and welcome back to the Legal Weekly Wine, where we discuss the week's hottest legal topics. This week, we are discussing Trump's war on Harvard. We're going to talk about the potential effect on Harvard, his request to defund a lot of programs through Harvard, which would even affect its research ability. We want to talk also about the lawsuits that Harvard has filed against the administration and Trump regarding this defunding, as well as his call to revoke student visas. This would be basically a disbanding of the international class at Harvard University, and how this might affect any other universities. So we're going to take that a little bit farther with freedom of speech and First Amendment rights. And we're going to go to another case regarding freedom of speech in high school speech and how this is coming about through the Trump administration. And we're going to wrap it up with another free speech issue with Trump versus an anonymous New York Times article that we're claiming was freedom of speech and what is happening to those who are rejecting or going against Trump in any way. So this is what we're going to discuss in an overall umbrella of Trump's war on Harvard. I'm Virginia Tehrani. I'm a 20-year attorney with Tehrani Law, LLC, because you never need a lawyer till you do. I'm a former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, currently practicing in civil law. So this is right up my alley. And I am joined by my dad, who is the dean of the Honors College at Middle Tennessee State University, Dr. John Vile.
Good to be here.
Good to have you. And I'm so glad, and not that I don't always love that you're on with me, but I'm really glad in this case because I think people are really interested, not necessarily in my part of the law, which I'm really glad to be putting some opinion in, but with the university part. And that's where you have a clear, continuing daily issue and, support of that you're in an administration of a public university. You know a little bit more of the ins and outs of funding, how it's obtained, what it's used for, and how this might be affecting Harvard. And I'm going to be interested in the differences between public and private universities. We're going to talk about what the monies are used for, how it's obtained, and what the ultimate issues are. Is this a First Amendment issue or otherwise? So thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
Okay, everybody, pull up a seat and grab a glass of whatever your favorite beverage is for happy hour here, because that's what we have. And Dr. Vile is supporting Pepsi continuously. Here we go. This is the funny thing. We should talk about some kind of, rights and constitutional issues with Pepsi's control of a university, because they seem to have taken over. They've paid for it. So Pepsi is part of MTSU. I feel like there should be a duel or something with the Coke products. But in support of you, yes.
The shame of it is, because I'm lactose intolerant, what I should be drinking. MTSU is known throughout the Southeast for its chocolate milk.
Oh.
We have our own dairy.
Oh.
And many people, including the wife who have drunk it, tell me that it tastes very much like a chocolate milkshake. It's very thick, very creamy, very good. So if you visit the MTSU campus, be sure that you purchase a quart or two.
Absolutely. I'm really sad I'm missing out right now. And the next time I visit, I'm going to have to drink a chocolate milk. But for now, I'm supporting you in MTSU as part of an alumna from MTSU. That was my graduation for undergrad. I am drinking a Diet Pepsi. So I have a Pepsi product, but diet. I prefer that. The Pepsi's a little too sweet. Between the Coke and the Pepsi, they're just a little too sweet for me. But I've got a Pepsi product. Dad has a Pepsi product. And let's talk about...
If you guys want to send extra money, let us know.
That's right. Dr. Vile is the dean of the Honors College and is in great shape with fundraising. He does a lot of fundraising for the Honors Department. And I got to give a shout out. I graduated from MTSU with the Honors Department. With the Honors Department, at that time, it wasn't a full honors college. Now it has become so, and I'm so proud of my school. I'm proud of Dr. Vile for everything he's put into it and how he's helped it grow. The fact that they even have their own building on campus, I'm really jealous, and I feel deprived from my years there. I missed out on this amazing building and section of campus. But again, I'm really proud proud to have come through the honors department and that you're representing us today in this crazy discussion about universities and what can the government control within a university. So Dr. Vile, let's get to very basics.
Okay.
What is the difference? And it seems simple, but ultimately, what do you believe is the difference between public and private universities?
Well, when it comes to the First Amendment, it's pretty clear. Congress shall make no law respecting, bridging freedom of speech, press, assembly, petition. So a public university is a governmental entity. So they are fully covered by the First Amendment.
The public
now,
schools.
Public universities and colleges. Many private colleges have voluntarily accepted the notion that, academic freedom, academic inquiry demands the kind of freedom of speech, press, assembly, and petition that one would need. And so many of them voluntarily do that, but they don't have the same legal obligation to do so.
Well, is there an idea, though, and this is for me as almost a layperson, shouldn't everybody in the U.S. have that same freedom? Why would a private university, I get that it's public, but why would a private university, because it has public citizens, why would they have a different standard?
Well, it's sort of, you have different spheres. It's like, as my child, you have a right to free speech, but if you say certain things in our house, you might get your mouth washed out.
Okay? That famous soap bar.
Yeah, that's not tyranny. That may be extreme, but
it wasn't at the time.
Right. The freedom of speech doesn't cover what private entities do to one another as a general rule.
So would this be something where, let's say Notre Dame is ultimately a Catholic university.
Right.
It comes up through a Christian base as well as the specific Catholicism. Do they have, if you know, or would they be able to limit speech against Catholicism or against Christianity on their campus if they chose to do that?
I think they could. I mean, they could certainly. I mean, think about it. If you're hiring for a position to teach theology, my guess is that you would want to hire fellow Roman Catholics, or at the very least, if you wanted an outside perspective, you might hire someone who's Jewish, but at least is not antagonistic to the Catholic Church. For many years, I'm trying to think, was it Nathan Hatch or there were two or three very prominent evangelical scholars who were hired by Notre Dame, and the reason, right, the reason was that their scholarship was very sound. They were not antagonistic to Christianity or religion, even though they were not, to my knowledge, Roman Catholics. Mark Knoll is the other name I was thinking of, and one or both of them taught there for a while.
So the idea ultimately is Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech.
Right, and that has been extended basically. I mean, Congress makes the law, and if Congress can't make a law, by implication, a president cannot issue an executive order that would also abridge freedom of speech.
You hit it right where I was leading and got there before me. If Congress can't, why would Trump or any president be able to create an executive order which carries the rule of law? And what you're saying is it's no different. It's the government. Congress makes the law, and a president cannot enforce or use a law that would be contrary to government control over speech.
Right.
Okay, so where we have it right now, and let's make sure that our facts are as clear as possible. And some are guesswork, and we're going to make sure that we say what is and what is not. But to the best of my understanding, the facts are that Trump has demanded that Harvard put certain policies in place with regard to their overall education programs, their acceptance of academics, specific types of academics, and their enrollment process.
Yes.
I believe, and some of that has been this consistent idea he's put out through his current administration in 2025 of let's get rid of the DEI programs. And
Well, and
go
it's
ahead.
combined with charges that Harvard was fostering anti-Semitism,
Right.
that it had created a hostile environment, particularly for Jewish students there. And what what's frustrating here for Harvard is that Harvard did respond to this, in some cases saying you're absolutely right. Uh, we need firmer discipline for people who are blocking classrooms, for people who are spewing hate against Jews or others. And so I'm sorry, Harvard has taken some steps to remedy that. And as far as I can tell, I'm going largely by a brief that was just filed 2 days ago.
By Harvard.
Uh, it's by the President and Fellows of Harvard versus U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and they picked that department because what the president has done is he has said, we don't like the way you're treating. We think you've been anti-Semitic. We don't think that there's viewpoint balance at your university. We think you have more liberals than conservatives, or more Democrats than Republicans, and we want a part in your admission process to make sure that that we have a balance of views here at Harvard University.
But this is the public government trying to get involved
That's right.
with admission processes for a private university.
Right, which is typically something that conservatives would scream to high heaven about.
Normally, right.
Conservatives believe in intermediary institutions. We believe families have rules, local, state, and government have rules, private institutions have rules, and then the national government. And so basically, Harvard is making a very conservative argument. They're saying it's not the government's business to micromanage the governance of a private university. And to the extent that they allow them to do so, you have not only these specific freedoms that we've mentioned, speech, press, assembly, and petition, but these are frequently related in U.S. Supreme and other court decisions to academic freedom and, academic inquiry, academic research. One would guess that people trained in the sciences would have a better idea as to whether a person is equipped to teach that than would somebody who's an elected official in Washington, D.C., with very few exceptions that you could think of.
Well, let me pause you there. And I know, we've gone through the freedoms that we can't restrict based on the First Amendment, which are the press, assembly, speech, et cetera. And you're saying, okay, there's not technically a freedom of education and a freedom of thought through academics. But I know that there are these cases that you've referenced, that there are some. What are some that have come up already through the Supreme Court, through our years of education, that deal with this idea that there is a right to education and a right of different viewpoints within education?
Well, I mean, there are hundreds of cases literally that deal with academic freedom. That, if you think about scientific inquiry, if you start by saying you can research anything as long as you agree that the Earth is the center of the universe and is revolved around by the sun, you're going to get very different outcomes than if you say, take the scientific view and go with it. And you think about academic freedom. There's a right of professors, of course, to speak. There's, to some extent, there's a right of students to learn. It's often said that there are some limits on freedom of speech. Almost every freedom of religion. You can't offer child sacrifices
Right.
as much as you might want to on occasion.
Even if you believe it, it's not allowed.
Right. But the one thing that most people agree is an absolute right is the right to think what you want. And that's very closely related to the right to speak. Now, again, a little bit more limitations on the right to speak than to think. But if you're going to have free thought, then you need freedom to be able to express that.
It seems to me, I maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that this is the first time, at least to my knowledge, that it would be so blatant or even in existence that a president or a government in control is trying to interfere with and be involved with the admissions process of
Well,
any school.
no, that's not quite right because you have the affirmative action cases,
Okay.
which involve, now that's not so much First Amendment as it is 14th Amendment equal protection. But you have had rules where the court has come in and said, you can't have an absolute quota in terms of black white students or whatever. If
Okay.
I remember, one of your first court cases dealt with something very similar. So
It
so
did.
we have that. That's primarily a Title VI. It's a civil rights issue rather than the other. What's fascinating in this case, you know, the old adage about not using a cannon to kill a flea. So Harvard, Harvard has a great reputation.
Yes.
I'd like to claim William and Mary, and I do, but it's second oldest, and it's not nearly as big. Doesn't Harvard literally has about a $50 billion endowment,
Mhm.
so it has considerable freedom because of that. And I was headed somewhere with that. Right. So Harvard has, as you would guess, with that kind of reputation, and particularly they have a law school there,
Mhm.
they have a medical school there, they have good science programs. And so they literally have something like $2 billion plus grants in any given year from the national government. These
Okay.
are grants to deal with things like tuberculosis research, Alzheimer's research, all kinds of health, social policy type issues. And Trump is saying because you haven't completely acceded to what I want, we're going to cut off all funding. And in doing so, he's ignored, you know, in the past, the famous case South Dakota versus Dole, 1987,
Okay.
in which the court decided that the national government could require that a state lower or raise the drinking age, if I remember correctly, from 18 to 21. And if they didn't, they could cut off some highway funds.
Hmm.
And the notion was that, you know, low age drinking leads to greater fatalities. And there was at least some nexus between what was going on here. In this case, and even there, then there were limits. You have to state very clearly, you know, what the conditions are for
Hmm.
accepting the aid. You need to give a hearing to make sure that it's not being withdrawn arbitrarily. So in this case, what the
Due
government is
process.
effectively saying is because maybe you think your undergraduate admission isn't being done properly. We're going to cut off $2 billion of aid that goes to medical, scientific, military, etc. uses. And it's excessive, and it does demonstrate. I mean, this is the kind of thing that you would expect if you were in communist China or communist Russia. The
Exactly.
powers on high dictate what you're going to teach and how you're going to teach it, and if you don't, you're going to get cut off. It's very totalitarian. It's about as un-American, frankly, as you can get. And again,
Right.
this doesn't mean that one has to say that Harvard or any other university is perfect. But basically, what's happened is some of the other universities, most notably Columbia,
Yes.
have bowed the knee. Uh, when they were given orders, they now, in fairness, Harvard has done a good bit on their own. They appointed some commissions, they changed some policies,
They did a
they
full
expelled some
investigation.
investigations, they expel some students, but not to Trump's liking. And so the universities that basically capitulated, he's going to leave them alone, and that leaves Harvard out there pretty much by itself. Now, and I'm sure others will join them, but they do have a little more financial independence than others do. But this is a major major decision. And again, it's if you said if you're going to do tuberculosis funding,
Mm.
we want a grant that equally considers African Americans and Caucasians in terms of the rate of tuberculosis.
Makes sense.
If you said when it comes to military funding, funding for whatever, we'd like to make sure that you give some credit to people who were veterans.
Sure.
Uh, these would be narrowly tailored to the specific purpose of the grant. But just to say, we don't like what you're doing over here, so we're going to completely cut off funding. And to do it, apparently, according to this brief, basically do it without hearing,
Mm.
without following the administrative, uh, what is it called? ADA, AP. Anyway, there's a specific act the Administrative Procedures Act. Without going through the notice, we're putting you on notice that we've
Mm.
detected this, giving you time to respond, then holding a hearing to decide whether you did or not.
Right.
But for basically one person, President of the United States, to say, we're going to cut off all your aid, it is unprecedented as far as I know. And
And
if
with
this can happen, then, if the richest institution in the
yes.
country, educational institution, can be brought to its knees, God help those of us who are in smaller, public or private universities.
Absolutely, it's very scary. And this is currently it's happening with Trump, but as you and I have said before in prior episodes, replace it with, President Smith, pick a name, whoever's next. Let's use Biden as a prior president. If Biden had said, Harvard, I'm going to revoke all your funding unless you put in DEI compliances,
Right.
unless you allow transgender sports, let's just change the policy. Then each time we get a new president, we change all of it. And now we're ruining our schools and we only have education for the 4 years of whatever program and ideas and ideals of that president and his or her party.
To put it in a way maybe that other people might consider, people that were generally conservatives, many of them like homeschools
Yes.
because they believe homeschooling gives a chance to develop, you can give lessons from scripture, you can have prayer,
Of course.
devotional exercises. You can teach, if you believe that America was founded as a Christian nation, you have the right to teach that. And they think that's a good thing because the government is not involved in telling you what to do. And this is the reverse of this. It's at the
Yes.
higher level, obviously, but it's like we want one person in Washington, and as you say, that's going to change. Probably, in 3 years, 3.5 years, we're going to have a new president, and he or she may or may not be of the same political party.
Right.
But do we want anybody? It's not just do we want Trump exercising this power? Do we want anybody exercising it? And
Yeah.
do we want them? If there are some matters of public policy that should be considered, I could see a policy that says we're going to give more money to schools that have metal detectors at their door
Right.
because we're trying to promote student safety. That's
Right.
one thing, but to say we're going to completely come in and decide who you hire and fire and what your disciplinary policies are and this and that. If Harvard capitulates to this, it's going to be a very serious matter.
Yeah, and to me, it's a very, very much a First Amendment issue of speech. Is
Absolutely.
if we don't allow this type of speech or this type of academic program or discipline, that is a form of speech. This class, this policy is a form of speech and ideas that are presented and submitted. And if we say we're not going to support your school and provide for any kind of funding for this type of research, if it's about X topic, and an X topic, this kind of topic is a speech to me, is a form of speech. If we're using,
Well, but here it's even worse. It doesn't matter what the topic is. They're just saying because the institution does something we don't like, nobody's going to get
right,
any money.
right.
Yeah.
And are we
It's
also getting into these federal grants? These come from Congress and the budget. Is
yes,
that right?
yes, that's right. They are congressionally authorized.
So now we're
Absolutely.
getting
So
back into that
we're back where
issue.
we are with the tariffs.
Hmm.
Where is tariffs yes, the president has some discretion, but who has the power to tax and spend? That's the power of Congress,
Right.
not a power of the president.
And I mean, let's also talk. I'm going to throw a little fun piece in because I like to stir
Okay.
the pot. Let's also talk about government waste now. So
Okay.
if we're in a position where we take the presentation by Trump and his administration that we're going to try to reduce and eliminate government waste, but now we're going to put people in charge of universities, and their hiring and firing and admissions process and review of their students and who's doing discrimination and who's got a DEI program or class or elective. If we're now putting people into these positions where we're going to start reviewing these universities, we're going to have to hire people for them. We're going to have to train them. We're going to have to send them. So we're
You want to talk about
creating
waste?
waste.
Okay, so think about a research project that's longitudinal.
Okay.
We're going to study over a 20-year period cancer rates among African Americans and whites, or cancer rates based on obesity or non-obesity.
Sure.
And in the middle of your study, you're told your funds are cut off.
Poof.
So how much money have we wasted because we have terminated a project whose outcome we don't yet know?
Yeah.
It's about as wasteful a thing as you can imagine, really.
Now, in addition to waste, we have deportation and foreign nationals and
Right.
visas that we're going to talk about, because not only is he trying to defund Harvard, but he's also trying to revoke, and initially it's been paused by a court, but he's revoked any student visas for studying, foreign visas for studying at Harvard. So he's trying to completely eliminate all of foreign studies at Harvard for this next year.
And he's doing it. He's doing it as a form of punishment.
Yes.
So go back to what he says he wants, right? He wants greater ideological diversity. So where do you get this? Well, if you're sitting beside a student from Africa, you're probably less likely to speak in stereotypes of Africa than if you weren't. If you have somebody there from Asia, they may have a different perspective on American foreign policy than somebody from here. And so one of the beauties of Harvard and many, I mean, even public universities like ours, we pride ourselves, if we can even get 300 or 400 students from abroad, that's a good thing.
Yes.
Because they're going to bring in some money. That's always good.
Of course.
And when you think about it, these are people who they're going to be in the country for at least 4 years.
Right. Or
and
two.
You would hope, most people, I think college years are pretty good years. And you would think if people have a pretty decent experience from a foreign country in America, they're less likely, I hope, to return home with stereotypes of ugly Americans than if they've never been here.
We accepted Einstein. With
not to as a student, but yes,
right. But he came as a teacher when World War II was happening, and all of the scientists and the researchers and the mathematicians were fleeing these countries in Europe.
What we're doing is we're potentially initiating a reverse brain drain, and this is so contrary to Trump's immigration policy. Remember, one of the things he was going to do is give people this golden passport. If you have $1 million or more, we're going to let you buy your way in the belief that these people not only have wealth, but they're probably smarter and they're going to generate our economy. Well, we're going to have the same thing. Instead of coming and working under a Harvard professor, they're going to go to Cambridge or Oxford or school in Canada or Australia or somewhere else in the world. So we're really going to be double losers on this if we're not careful.
And it's shocking to me in the sense of it's a continuation of Trump's policy that he stated in the election process during his candidacy of we're going to deport illegals. But in
Yeah,
this
but these are not
piece,
illegals.
exactly.
Yeah.
Why are we refusing residency or at least acceptance at this school? So there's still a possibility they could go to other American schools, but why would they, with the possibility that their visas would be revoked completely rather than just for Harvard studies? So we're now essentially, not literally, but essentially deporting students who are here legally. We're not deporting illegals, illegal aliens, illegal residents. We're not even deporting at this point the Venezuelan gang members, right, who allegedly have come in.
Well, we would be, except the court has stepped in.
Right, but this isn't, we're talking 7,000 to 9,000 students, foreign students at Harvard. And to me, it looks like a mass deportation, the largest that we would have, versus the couple of hundred Venezuelan gang members who are allegedly overtaking our country. It looks like we're trying to get rid of all of the legally
Trump is
placed
simply trying
foreign
to punish Harvard.
nationals.
That's what it is. It's, one of the fascinating things about Trump is that he constantly talks about the weaponization of the Justice Department.
Yes.
And that's exactly what he's doing. And I know one of the cases we were going to discuss, I think today, is this Miles Taylor that I just sort of learned about.
Yes.
During Trump's first administration, it's very unusual for the New York Times or most, in fact, I have tried to send in anonymous. I sent articles to newspapers and said I didn't want my name attached, and they refused to publish it. But anonymous speech has a long history in the United States. And some of you think about it, the most widely cited anonymous speech is probably the Federalist Papers.
Oh, interesting.
They were published under the name of Publius. They weren't published under Madison, Hamilton, and Jay's name. And they were able to speak more frankly, and they didn't have to worry. And somebody says, well, Madison, he's a Virginian, or Hamilton, he's a monarchist, or whatever. They could just make the argument and judge it on the basis of the argument. So this person that we now know to be Miles Taylor published an article during Trump's first administration, and he basically said, I'm exaggerating a bit, but he basically said Trump is somewhat unhinged.
Right.
He's very erratic.
That was the implication.
He tends to make decisions on an ad hoc basis. He's opposed to the deep state, but it's not the deep state, it's the steady state.
Yeah.
There are some of us here who are trying to protect Trump and the country against himself. And this article got a lot of attention. And in 2020, if I remember, this person, he was the, let's see. He was chief of staff of the Department of Homeland Security.
So he was in the Trump administration.
Right. He basically said there's a group of us here who and what's fascinating, he says, we support Trump when it comes to effective deregulation, historic tax reform, a more robust military, and the like. But what we don't like, and he's particularly critical of something we're seeing in this administration, which is Trump's apparent affinity for authoritarian leaders. He says, we're on the side of democracies abroad, and he published this article. It upset Trump to no end, and when in 2020, Taylor indicated that he had written the article and he was now supporting Biden. And when Trump got back into office, he immediately issued a memorandum calling for investigation as to whether Taylor had violated the Espionage Act and committed treason.
Right.
And in doing so, he's basically following the pattern that the English kings followed when they would indict somebody for what was known as seditious libel. It's very similar to the Sedition Act of 1798. If you criticize the president or his administration, then you're guilty of treason. And Taylor, who has since written a book, by the way, Taylor is fighting this and basically, saying the same. He's saying he expressed an opinion. I think he's a little little hesitant as to whether he should have done it anonymously.
Right.
But he says at the time, if he hadn't done it anonymously, he doesn't, the focus would have been on him as an individual rather than on the argument that's making.
Yeah.
What I find most fascinating, and I haven't seen this discussed, but according to Taylor, people high in the first Trump administration were actually considering whether they should invoke the 25th Amendment, which provided for replacement of a president who had become unhinged. And this becomes a
Mm.
particularly interesting argument given all the things that Trump and others are now saying about, Sleepy Joe Biden and how he
Right.
wasn't in control and everything was being done by autopen. You almost wonder if he's trying to preempt, if this investigation goes forward for Biden, I think it should be extended to say, are we sure that Trump has the proper temperament?
Right.
He's just about the age that Biden was, right, in second term.
Yes, he's
It's not
about
going to
to
be
turn
far behind before,
79.
yeah, before people want to know the same issues.
Yeah,
But we'll have a nice parade for him on the
oh my
14th.
goodness.
We're all looking forward to that, I'm sure.
I have so many things to say about the parade, but they're not legally
Oh,
related or
parades are nice, right?
constitutional.
We have all
Oh,
these military
yes.
bands.
Love a
Apparently, we're
military
going to have to
band.
spend a couple $1 million repairing the streets afterward because they're not used to heavy tanks and armored vehicles going down through the middle of them. But a good time will be had by all.
I
I feel
I will say this as the most neutral thing I could possibly say.
okay.
Living in the DMV, okay, I live at 10 minutes from DC. Right? I'm in Maryland. I lived before in Northern Virginia. I am often in DC. I traveled there just the other week. And I will tell you, the traffic is so bad with decent streets that haven't been torn up and are not under construction that I am in fear. I'm genuinely worried about what we're going to do to get in and out of and through DC if the roads are torn up. These are not large highways. These are streets that are, fairly narrow. There's monuments throughout the city. There's
Okay.
museums. There's these buildings. It's not like there's a lot of space to fix roads. And if we're cutting off complete roads because of a construction in the middle of DC near the White House, near Congress and the Supreme Court, it's already a mess. And I cannot
What
imagine as a resident of the DMV trying to even get around if we have construction for the next 10 years to repair roads that were used on one day.
Well, we will see. One of the things I discovered in my visit to Paris not long ago
Yes.
was in the Champs-Élysées and those roads. All of Paris used to be very narrow streets,
Yes.
and Napoleon and others came in and they tried to widen the boulevards so that they could have parades like this, and also so that they could, when there were uprisings, as occurred fairly frequently in Parisian history, they could get troops in to take care of them.
Yeah.
So
Well,
anyway,
poor
we got a
Mayor.
little off topic there. I mean,
Yeah, Mayor Bowser.
to my knowledge, nothing unconstitutional about having a
It
parade.
doesn't
Uh,
seem to be. Again, it's not a legal issue, but as far as a practical person who drives in this area, it's very upsetting.
and I'd sure like a parade on my birthday, end of April. For those who need to know, you want to start preparing now.
We'll start working on it. I'll pull out my old trumpet and
Fair enough.
play a little ditty for you down the street.
Well, just don't bring bagpipes or you lose your sister.
I know bagpipes, harmonica, and what's the other? The accordion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's good times for her. So, okay, so we did get a little off topic, but what I want to say about Miles Taylor to finish up that part, and then we'll finish the overall episode with the high school speech case,
Yeah.
is for Miles Taylor. I think that the biggest, most alarming part of this is what you were ending with of individual retaliation, right? This is not just. I really don't
I,
like
as
what he
president,
said.
am ordering you to go investigate X,
Right.
which is exactly what Trump has accused Biden of having done.
Exactly. And there's this overall fear, and it's been expressed, I believe, by the Republican representative of Alaska, of saying people aren't saying what they should be saying because there's fear of retaliation. And what appears to be happening is there's specific retaliation. We have Harvard. We have all of these law firms that the executive orders are specifically naming law firms. He's specifically revoking security clearances. One of the first things that he did with Miles
And that's
Taylor
one
when
of
he
the things,
got
by the
in.
way, I left that out. One of the things that he did to Taylor was
Yeah.
to revoke not only his, but apparently Taylor had gone on to teach in Pennsylvania, and he revoked security clearances of other people that he was working with there. So,
Right. So it's if somebody said a bad thing about me, I'm just going to revoke their clearances. I'm not going to let them into federal buildings. I'm not going to let them, have these clearances, have these authorities that they've had for a long time just
Right.
because they've said something against Trump. So, what happens to us, Dad? Is we've got a little podcast now. I wish it were bigger than it is, but are they
let's
coming
keep flying under the radar here.
right?
We love Trump.
Yeah. But is it something that, you start from the top and even the little ones can't say something against him, even if it's legally based. And that's where
Well,
we're
and
starting from.
and this brief, one of the storied principles of First Amendment freedom is the notion of the chilling effect.
Yes,
If you can bring down the best endowed institution, the oldest and best endowed institution in the country in education, can anybody else withstand? And the answer is probably no. So you're choosing your victims here in a way that will send a message to others. And you see the
right.
same thing with a lot of the immigration. If you can pick somebody up on a can, if mass men can surround a woman and carry her off from a university, then which of us could say that the same could not happen to us or one of our friends?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. All right. So
Okay, so we're going to go on to LM versus Middleborough.
Middleborough, yes, we're going to finish with this. So we're going to go away from the most controversial to something that's still controversial.
Yeah, pretty controversial,
It's
actually.
it's a Supreme Court case that another cert denial. So we've just
Yes.
talked in another episode about a denial of cert on another case. This is another one that the Supreme Court has picked up and said we're not going to review it. So essentially, they say, we know this case is before us, but we're not going to review it for specific reasons. Some stated, some not. They denied the review.
Non-stated.
Non-stated. Except for it in the dissent. Sometimes they actually say that, well, this is what the court's doing. But
Right.
legally and specifically, it doesn't state why the cert's been denied, why they've refused to take the case up. But the effect of a denial of certiorari is that the lower court's decision stands.
Right.
And in this case, we've
And I
got
can give a reason actually here. If you wanted to make an argument as to why they should deny cert, we haven't given the facts yet, but we'll get to that. But we don't, to my knowledge, have a case involving this specific form of speech from another circuit where they've ruled differently. So often one test that the court will use is if the circuits are split, then it doesn't seem reasonable that people in Massachusetts would have fewer First Amendment rights than somebody in Louisiana or California. So it will step in. And to my knowledge, this is the only case. But to say a little bit about the facts, we got a seventh grader, and his name is Liam Morrison. But when it's a juvenile, it's very frequent just to put their initials. So it's LM versus Middleborough. He's in a middle school in Massachusetts, and he wears to school one day a sweatshirt that says there are only two genders. And principal calls him in the office, says you can't wear that here. You have to go home. He goes home. Day or two later, he comes with another one that says there are, in big capital letters, censored genders. And the principal says, do you want me to expel you again? And he says, no, I don't want to be expelled, but if I have to put on something else, I will. But I'm going to go to court to protect my rights. And the most relevant decision for this case is a 1969 case,
Tinker.
Tinker versus Des Moines. And it involved middle and high school students who, 69, Vietnam War still going strong.
Yes.
They decide to wear black armbands in protest of the Vietnam War. And the principal expels them. And it makes it all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the court, almost maybe for the first time, basically says even high school, middle school students have rights. You don't forfeit, and teachers do too. You don't forfeit all First Amendment rights simply because you're on the schoolhouse grounds.
Right.
Prior to this, the court probably would have said, this is a matter for, schools are basically a local matter. Although, now you do have the flag salute cases where the court initially said schools can decide whether to require compulsory flag salutes and then say, no, you can't require, not the business of government to tell students what they have to say and what they don't have to say.
And this was the Jehovah's Witness case that we talked about on a
that,
prior
that, that
episode.
was that we dealt with recently. But what's unusual in this case is, and I don't know that, so the court denies cert, which means there are not 4 justices who agree that they want to hear it yet.
Right.
Put that yet in there for mentioning that there could be another. So 2 justices, Thomas and Alito, filed dissents. And Thomas's is very fascinating because Thomas says, I never agreed that students have rights to begin with. He's of the old school. Teachers should teach and students should learn.
Right, as juveniles, right.
Yeah, right. I don't know what he would do at college level, but at that level, yeah. But he says, this is inconsistent with Tinker. If you're going to leave the case there, then you got to go with it. And then Justice Alito files a much longer dissent, which I personally find fairly compelling, and in part for this reason. He points out, and let me see if I can find it, that the school did allow, the school sponsored a Pride Spirit Week. Right. And they also permitted the student to wear a shirt that said he, she, they, it's all okay. So that would seem to indicate that the school is putting its thumb on the scale.
Yes.
On what is an emotional, highly contested issue, right? I mean,
right, and permitting only one viewpoint.
Right. It's viewpoint content discrimination.
It is not content neutral.
It is not content neutral.
And in some ways, what I want to step in and say briefly here is, there are some who would say, well, it's not spoken, right? And in the Constitution, the way that these cases have always been interpreted is that some things that you wear that say things, your shirts, are a form of speech.
Symbolic speech.
It's symbolic.
Well, and actually, if it's printed words, it's close to freedom of press. It's not.
Sure.
It's not identical, but I mean, it's
a form of speech. It's what you are saying out loud to others by wearing
a viewpoint.
Yes.
Conveying a viewpoint.
And the armbands, now that was specifically symbolic speech because there wasn't anything written on it, but it meant something. It was saying something. And the court said yes, it's going to upset people. And this, I think, was the biggest part of it is it's going to upset people. There are people who are for the war and who have family members and friends who are over there fighting.
Maybe even died over there.
Right. But, people are going to get upset by things in the normal course of politics in the United States and their lives.
That's what Alito says.
Let them be upset.
And what's fascinating is that the lower court, and I don't know if how handy I have it here, the lower court basically comes up with its own 2-part test, which is nowhere to be found in Tinker. So it permits censorship where, quote, the expression is reasonably interpreted to demean one of those characteristics of personal identity, given the common understanding that such characteristics are unalterable or otherwise deeply rooted, and that demeaning them strikes a person at the core of his being. And then that the demeaning message is reasonably forecasted to poison the educational atmosphere due to its serious negative psychological impact on students with the demean characteristic and therefore lead to symptoms of a sick school. So they devised this new test, and as far as I can tell, it's out of whole cloth. Now, I could make an argument for one of the tests.
Sure.
I mean, because remember, this is happening at the same time that we have this dispute in California as to what to do with the trans athlete.
Yes.
You know, a former male competing in a women's sport and doing
Who's
very well.
winning? Right.
Right. So it's a highly emotional issue. Whatever you say about it, and what I don't know about this case is I don't know how I would have ruled if the school had a regulation that said we will not allow any political speech on campus at all.
Right.
You can't be pro-gay or anti-gay, pro-trans or anti-trans.
Pro-abortion, anti-abortion. Let's get it all out.
Just because we're afraid of the disruption. But what's fascinating in Tinker, the court does say, if there is evidence that this speech has caused or is very likely to cause substantial disruption in the school curriculum, if it's going to lead to fights, if there's going to be a riot, then clearly the court can. But in this case, there's no evidence of that.
Right.
And so basically, Alito is saying, you're being nervous Nellies, and you're doing so at the cost of free speech, free expression.
Right.
But could the school, and I think this is a public school.
Yes.
If it's a private school, you wouldn't have an issue here. So go back to the distinction we made earlier. Private school can say, your dress has to be down to here.
Yeah, here's your uniform.
This color. Yeah, that sort of thing.
And that's partly to prevent such things. So if you go to private schools, most of them have uniforms so that you don't have any words or sayings on your clothing.
So.
I know that. That's some of the reasons, honestly, I think it's a great idea for a lot of people, but it's to prevent that as much as possible.
Well, some of it is it also prevents wealth. Somebody we're carrying a Gucci purse and somebody else barely having a handbag. I mean, that sort of thing.
Fair enough. But a lot of it is to prevent that kind of speech and disruption. Right. But the public schools, I'm with you, is, to me, it's not so much that they didn't allow the clothing, but why would they allow one and not another type?
Right.
Either disallow it all or allow it all.
Right. In the Tinker case, there was evidence that people, I think some of them had worn an Iron Cross, which is typically a symbol of Germany. Some of them had worn, I'm guilty. 7th grade, I had like 8 Goldwater buttons that I proudly wore every day. And let everybody know my persuasion at the time. Not sure it would be the same today. But yeah, you can't. I'm trying to remember the phrase that Scalia used in one of the hate crime cases that you can't. It's not. Is it Doyle's rules? You can't have one side, bound by this official handbook and the other side going, doing what it pleases. And again, this is a highly emotional issue.
Yes,
I get why the court, is or why the school would be nervous about it, but I think they dealt with it in a very ham-handed way, and I frankly. Unless the court is just going to completely retreat from Tinker, which I don't think is going to happen, I don't think this is going to stand. I mean, it may stand for 2 or 3 years,
right?
Maybe longer. But I think if this were, in fact, if you were in school and you were willing to do it, I might hand you a T-shirt and say, "Let's have another surrogate here."
I tell you what,
Probably
I would
bankrupt
now.
myself.
I totally would now. And here, let me throw another. Again, I'm going to stir the pot here.
Okay.
What if I'm waiting for the case with someone who wears a shirt anti-Trump? I'm waiting for that
If you
one.
have the right to, if you have the right, if you can wear a MAGA hat to school, then you could wear an anti-MAGA hat. I mean,
Exactly.
it's that clear
So
for
well,
sure.
but it should be, right? So this
Yeah.
seems clear to me too, but I'm waiting for that case.
Okay.
Are there, a speech that someone's wearing the MAGA hat, or someone's not wearing a MAGA hat, or someone's wearing an anti-Trump shirt or a pro-Trump shirt or something like that, where it's, again, content specific. Where is one school going to say, no, you can't wear the MAGA hat? But to me, that is also an issue that could possibly disrupt curriculum. So if we're talking
Sure.
about cases and things in schooling that could disrupt curriculum, to me, Trump himself is such a polarizing figure that in a high school, support or lack of support for Trump would be just
Well,
as
you could have
disruptive a
said the same thing
behavior.
about Hillary Clinton
Yeah,
or maybe even Biden. I mean, Obama certainly. A
right.
lot of political figures are very controversial.
But school is also one of those things where you're supposed to learn how to debate and learn to accept other people's opinions and to
So,
respect other people's opinions,
right. So one of the
allegedly.
terms that the court often uses is that schools are laboratories of democracy,
Yeah.
and that what should be taught here is that you could I think this is true. I think you could respect trans people and still believe that there are only two genders, or
Right.
vice versa.
You
I think
should
you
be
could.
able to
Right.
respect the other view.
Right. You could say, well, I think you're an idiot if you think there are only two genders, but
But
you have the right to be an idiot.
right,
Yeah.
exactly, and it could be said for either way. So to me, this disruption of the curriculum is really more of the anti-Israel protests and riots, but those
Right.
again are not quite at the high school level that we've seen. Those are at the college.
Right.
But I think what you've hit on is this language of the democracies, that this is an avenue and breeding ground for democracies. And if we're taking away that speech, those differences of an opinion because people are uncomfortable or because they don't like the other viewpoint, then we are chipping away at democracy from the top down. And at this point, I think people should be concerned, and
Well,
wrapping it up, of what's happening to
so
our
I mean,
education.
so we just had a decision by our local school board revoking. They had pulled trans books from the library,
Okay.
and their attorneys told them, if you don't put them back on the shelf, you're going to be sued and you're not going to be able to pay the fine.
Right.
And so, think of it that this is sort of that in reverse. You're saying we don't want any discussion of this. We don't want anybody ever thinking about this in our school. Well,
Right.
they may not think about it there, but they're going to go home and Google it. So you might as well confront it in a public setting rather than a private one.
Yeah, but in that way, if we're going to control it so much, are we getting into, China controls even their internet usage and what
Sure.
their citizens find and use on the internet. So again, I go back
If you
to
stick to Truth
education.
Social, you don't have to worry about this. There'll be everything that you need to know is right there.
It's a great idea. Great idea. Okay, everybody. So that's going to wrap up our conversation. We've devolved a little here.
Okay. Quote me on that.
I don't know. We'll do a clip or something. But in any case, we hope you've at least enjoyed the conversation. Have some thoughts on your own. Please like and subscribe, like our channel, subscribe to our channel, so that you can listen to it again when it comes back up each week, and so that it can be on other people's channels and on their feeds. Also, don't forget to go to www.thelawunscripted.com for fun legal sayings and merchandise. We've got a lot of merchandise for everybody there to pick and choose from, to have a good laugh and, make some speech out there in your normal everyday life with your clothes. And when you're not wearing our wonderful clothing and speech-based clothing, you can also study for the bar. bar. We do have classes, we have lectures, we have hypotheticals. So if you're studying for the bar this summer, check those out so that you can get a little bit of extra work and help for your test this summer, and especially those hypotheticals. If you think that you're prepared, try one of them. See what you would respond. See if it's consistent with what an answer would be. And we will also then catch everybody next time on our Legal Weekly Wine.